Hi there, and welcome to the Paula Fiscal Show. We are celebrating two things today. Number one, this is my third year of this show. And number two, one of my very first guests when I first began this show in 2014 was my friend Carol Ruth Silver, who at that time published her first book, Freedom Rider Diary. So we have with us today Carol Ruth Silver, who is talking about the first book she's ever written, now in paperback, which is a very big deal. For those of you that know me, I've been an independent bookseller in the past, and for an author to go through the process with the publisher and the promotion and the marketing, which, by the way, we did do a few book tours throughout the United States, and then to have your book actually come out in paperback, it's a big deal. So we want to welcome Carol Ruth Silver, and you can talk to us about how long it took for you to get to this point and how much fun it's been.
It has been a lot of fun. Paula, you have been a very, very important part of making the book selling, the book promotion, book authoring be fun. Because there's also a huge amount of work and a huge amount of I won't say
well,
negativity.
I know you're an editing perfectionist. So you edited your book before it came out at least what?
Oh, umpteen times.
Umpteen times. And then you would send it out to your friends to also
yes, that's right.
edit and correct the English.
As I was getting ready to have the paperback published, I sent to the publishers a list of typos that had crept in, that we had not seen and that somehow had made themselves, had published themselves. So there was one thing that should have been 2TO and instead it was TN, and nobody caught that. All the people who read it, you
and the
me,
editors,
and the editors and the proofreaders and the copy. But you know, a book is a wondrous thing. This book is now the paperback version, half the price of what the
hardback version.
The hardback version.
But let's go back a few steps so you can tell our new viewers exactly how it came about when you first wrote the book, when you first started it.
Oh, well.
And talk about your 60s civil rights activities.
For those of you who have not met me and have not seen this book, my name is Carol Ruth Silver, and I was a freedom rider. And freedom riders were people who, in 1961, got on trailways and Greyhound buses and traveled into the South, where segregation, apartheid, was still the law of the land. Jim Crow had come after the Civil War, and we're talking now of just about exactly 100 years after we fought the Civil War. We thought that the Emancipation Proclamation had freed the slaves, but something happened after that. The South didn't quite win the war, but they took over the white Southerners who had fought the Civil War became the people in power in the South. And they established what were called Jim Crow laws to segregate African Americans from whites in schools, in restaurants, in transportation, everywhere.
So you said that when you first decided to do this, your parents weren't in favor of it, but you got the call.
Well, you know, I was a college student, a college graduate in 1961. I had graduated from the University of Chicago College. I was working in New York, and and everywhere in New York, everywhere in the United States, through the new technology of you know, in every generation there are new technologies. Today we think about Uber and Lyft and the internet and so forth. In our day, the new technology was the fax machine. So the fax machine made it possible for photographs of what was going on in the South, of people getting beaten up, of a bus being burned, a whole Greyhound bus being burned in Anniston, Alabama, and the people who were burning the bus tried to keep the civil rights people inside the bus to kill them. It was basically an attempted murder. That all was going on, and that was in Alabama, but we were in New York, and our New York Times had pictures on every section about that. And the London Times had that. And newspapers all over the world, because of this new technology, were able to show that this terrible thing that was happening in North Carolina, in Alabama, in Mississippi, in Georgia, the civil rights movement was underway, and it wasn't pretty. So we were talking about this, and everybody was saying, oh,
as students you were talking about this.
Well, I was working at the UN, and we would get to the water cooler, and that would be the conversation. So as I was going home one day in May of 1961, somebody was playing the radio, and there was this booming voice coming out. It was the voice of Jim Farmer, who was then the head of CORE, and it said, basically, we want you to be a freedom rider. We want you to get on a bus, white people and black people, white students and black students together, and to travel through Georgia, Mississippi, all through the South, and break these laws, break the laws of segregation, challenge the Jim Crow laws that have been the law of the land for almost 100 years. We want to break that. And I said, I looked to my right, and I looked to my left, and the other people on the bus, and I said, who's he talking to? And it came to me, he's talking to me. And I thought, I have got to get myself into this movement. I have got to be a freedom rider.
And you had just graduated from law school, so you were planning on practicing law anyway? You were planning on pursuing this
Not
career?
Exactly.
No.
Not exactly. I had graduated from college, taken a year off to go and work, and I was planning to enter law school.
Oh, so this was, then you were really young. Okay.
I was pretty young.
You were 21, 22?
Yeah, exactly. And I was afraid that if I went to Jackson, if I went to the Freedom Rides and got arrested, that then I would not be allowed to go to law school, or if I went to law school and then got into practicing law, or then wanted to get into practicing law, that the Bar Association would challenge my right to do that because I had a jail record. So it was a very frightening thing. You know, I had worked very hard to get to where I was, to get to the point where I could go to law school, become a lawyer, be a person who could fight for social justice through the law, and I was asking myself to risk all of that by becoming a freedom rider.
And how did you go through that when you decided that Mr. Foreman was talking to you? Was there a process that you went through?
Yes.
Did you
Jim
make
Farmer.
phone calls?
Right.
Did you take a poll? I know you like to take polls.
It was Jim Farmer, not Jim Foreman, who came later and who was the head of SNCC, and whose son has just written a book, which I'll tell you about. But the guy who was the head of CORE at that time was named Jim Farmer, and he had that trained voice of a preacher, deep and resonant and convincing, and he was the one who was doing these interviews, and the interview was what I guess I heard.
So you actually had to go through an interviewing process before they would allow you to be a freedom rider?
Yes, but it was very minimal. I called up and I took a couple of phone calls before I got to talk to somebody who then told me. The big question they wanted to know was, could I pay my own fare? Could I pay my own bus fare?
So and so it had to do with whether or not you could sustain yourself economically during this social justice action.
Well, I mean, obviously they wanted to know that I was committed, to nonviolence, because that was the big weapon that the civil rights movement had that was so successful. Martin Luther King had just proven that with the bus boycott in Montgomery, Alabama, and everybody who went on the freedom rides, everybody who was going to be a civil rights activist was committed to nonviolence. And I also said, yes, I can commit myself to being a nonviolent person, to following the rules that were set down by Mahatma Gandhi in India, to essentially to love everybody and to accept whatever might be dished out.
And didn't they have classes to teach you
they had,
ignore people that were abusive or said things that...
I didn't get training in New York, which is where I started from, but by the time I went from New York to Washington to Atlanta, all on the Greyhound buses, in Atlanta they sent me to Nashville, Tennessee. And in Nashville we had training, and the training consisted of a group of us that were going to be going on the Freedom Ride would sit kind of as if we were sitting at a lunch counter, and a group of people would come up behind us and yell at us and pour ketchup and water.
And you had scripts, and you had people that were playing the various roles.
They were playing those roles. And our job was to do nothing. It's very difficult to do nothing when somebody is attacking you, but that was what you were supposed to do. The only defensive moves, the only things that you were instructed how to do, was to raise your arm over your head so that if there was some modicum of protection, it would be breaking your arm instead of breaking your skull. That was very scary.
But still, at the very young age that you were, I think that...
we were all fearless.
All of well, a lot of our viewers want to hear how you made the decision to do this, because it was unheard of and very courageous, but some people might have called it foolhardy for you to do it. And yet, many of the reasons that we have our rights today are because of people like you that did this at a young age, but also that you're writing the book, and you wrote the book in prison, because we need to get to that story.
Oh, yes. Well, just to conclude the training, so there I am in Nashville, and we've had this training, and now we're getting ready to get on the bus, and the person conducting the training says, but there's one last thing you have to do. And so we all stopped, and she said, you have to make out your will. You have to make a last will and testament which will tell your family, if something happens, if you don't come back, if you get killed, why you are doing this, and give them some solace. And that was perhaps the most, that's when it really came home.
That was the wake-up call.
That was the wake-up call.
Because you hadn't written your will before.
I had not written my will before. So I wrote my will, just one page of handwriting, which I never got back after the Freedom Rides, because they took them there in Nashville and preserved them, and I guess when I didn't get killed, they threw them away or whatever. But yeah, so we went on. There were 6 in my party. There were 3 divinity students from Yale. There were 2 divinity students from Yale plus me. Those were the white students. Then there were 3 black divinity students from a college in Virginia. And we, the 6 of us, got on a bus. And there wasn't any mob or anything like that when we got on the bus in Nashville, but there were a dozen reporters, and they were all very surprised to see that I was there. They said, "Oh, we heard that there was a woman that was going on this freedom ride, but we thought that she wouldn't go," and we couldn't believe it.
So people were expecting you to back out.
Well, they were, but certainly not me. So we got to Jackson, Mississippi, and Nashville is due north of Jackson. And when the bus crossed the border from Tennessee into Mississippi, we saw out the back window, because we were all sitting in the back. Segregated buses require that African Americans sit in the back of the bus. That's where the expression,
right,
go to the back of the bus, comes from. So we were all, white and black, were sitting in the back of the bus, and we saw out the back window that police officers or Mississippi, I guess, highway patrol cars came and were driving in back of the bus. Now, we didn't know whether they were there to protect us or there to attack us, but that's what we saw. So we got into Jackson, Mississippi. We got to the bus station. Everybody else got off the bus. This was a commercial bus. Everybody had a ticket, and we each had tickets. And the 6 of us kind of stood together in the middle of the bus and held hands and said a prayer and wished each other luck. And we got off the bus. And as we got off the bus, there were reporters, there were all kinds of people, but there was no... but as we started walking toward the terminal, there was no obstruction to our entering the 2 different doors. One door said white intrastate travelers only, and the other one said Negro intrastate travelers only. Negro was the polite term for African Americans in those days. Many fewer people used that term than other more offensive terms, but in any event, the signs were in that mode. So we, the 3 of us who were white, walked in through the set of doors that said Negroes only, and the 3 African American young men walked in through the door that said white only, and I'm sure that their experience was the same, pretty much the same as ours. When we walked in, there were no African American, Negro, black, or any other people of color in that waiting room. There was just a line of big, large. I shouldn't be derogatory, of large police officers with some level of sunburn around the neck. And those guys looked at us with such fury, with such hatred.
So they were anticipating.
Yes, they were anticipating.
And they were there in force.
Force.
There wasn't just 1 or 2. They
Right.
had a big group of people.
They had a big group. Anticipating our arrival.
Your arrival.
And we felt so innocent. We felt so small. We felt so, how can you object to our walking into a waiting room? But anyway, so the first police officer stepped out and said, "Yeah, y'all move on." And our spokesperson, John, said, "We are moving, sir." And I said, "I just want to use the restroom." And he said, "Y'all are under arrest. y'all are under arrest. And he took and shoved us out through this waiting room to the other side, where we came out on the street. The whole thing didn't take more than a minute or 2 minutes, and there we were pushed into a big black police wagon, what we used to call a paddy wagon. And we got in, the three of us, and then just another couple of seconds later, the other three kids, the other three students that we had been traveling with, the three black students from Virginia, were also pushed into this paddy wagon.
To the same wagon. And it wasn't a segregated wagon.
There wasn't a segregated wagon. And the door clanged shut, and the driver revved up the engine, and they took off. And we looked at each other and we laughed. And we said, look at us. We have integrated public transportation in Mississippi. But anyway, it was funny to us.
There were a lot of, but what it was is that everyone had anticipated you were going to be there, so the law enforcement had already reinforced themselves and had tens of hundreds of people ready to arrest you.
Yeah, they were committed to not allowing what happened in Alabama to happen in Mississippi. They didn't want to be all over the news in every country in the world as these bad guys in Mississippi who had attacked a group of peaceful civil rights protesters. And so they whisked us off to jail, and
that's where your story begins on the book.
Well, the book was then, I was first in the Hinds County Jail, first in the city jail, then in the Hinds County Jail, then in Parchman Penitentiary. And in Parchman Penitentiary, we were allowed to write letters to our parents. And I stole a piece of lead from one of the pencils. I stole a piece of paper, and I kept a diary by writing, when nobody could see me, a whole bunch of, the story of what went on.
But didn't they ask you what you were doing, or did any of the...
Nobody ever saw.
Nobody saw what you were doing?
Nobody saw me writing, because I would do that only late at night or early in the morning, or whenever there wasn't somebody coming up and down. So when we got out, a lot of people, a lot of the prisoners like myself had all their papers taken from them.
They were confiscated.
They were confiscated. But I saw in advance that that's what was happening. So I put all my notes in a dirty old envelope that also had my jail record in it. And somehow they didn't catch it. I managed to get out with my notes. They did catch some stuff, but I got out with my notes and with my chess set, and was able to write it up into a manuscript. And for 50 years, nobody wanted to publish it.
That's right. Let's talk about the delayed response of the public and
of the publishers. It wasn't until 50 years later, 50 years after I was in jail, I was at the 50th anniversary celebration of the Freedom Rides in Jackson, Mississippi, with a lot of
which you
people.
Helped form.
Yes, but more importantly, I had donated a copy of this manuscript to Tougaloo College archives, and a reporter for the Jackson, Mississippi paper saw it there. It was in an exhibit, and he said, "Oh, wow!" And he called the University Press of Mississippi. University Press of Mississippi called me and said, "Would you like to have your manuscript
and you
published?"
said, "Would
I said yes, and here we are. So now we have the paperback version of the same. It's just the same as the hardcover, only it costs half as much, and it still has the pictures and everything. And I hope that some of your people watching here today will would like to buy it, it's on Amazon.
And you
Barnes
know, we
and
were
Noble.
waiting for it to come out in paperback because
That's right.
as a hardback
Yeah, it's a hard
book,
sell.
it was well, as a former bookseller, I can tell you that it's a big commitment to spend $38,
Yeah.
$40 with tax, and then the book now is half that.
Yeah.
So this will
right.
make it more accessible for people that are
Right.
teachers and in schools and nonprofits.
That's right. And one of my hopes is that I will raise enough money in my foundation, the Freedom Writers
Yes,
Foundation.
talk about the foundation.
Yeah.
A bit.
So as part of all of this, I created something called Freedom Writers Foundation, and we have done things like give money to freedom writers who are poor, who are
Down
mostly
in their luck now.
yeah,
Yes.
mostly African American rural freedom writers in Mississippi and Alabama. We've given money for dental work. We have given free books. We've paid for this and that. And we're going to try to raise some money this summer to put packages of this book and a few other civil rights books in school libraries
That would be
in
wise.
Mississippi.
Yes, we need to have these books in the
Yes.
libraries for sure. So is there any message that you'd like to give to any of our viewers that are thinking of going out and joining the rallies that are going on right now, or maybe a budding author? And then maybe a phone number if you would like people to contact you.
It is important that we, in today's political situation, that we all remember we are, wherever we are, we can do something. Whatever it is, something as small as helping one person cross the street, as small as making cookies for a rally, do it. That's it. Do it.
Thank you so much for joining us. The Paula Fiscal Show airs on Sundays at 3 o'clock p.m. on Channel 29, and it also has reruns on Channel 76. We want to thank our guest for today, Carol Ruth Silver, who for me personally has been an inspiration in many, many activities. And for those of you that are watching and you're making phone calls, we will be taking calls shortly after this program airs. And if you would like to watch the show, you may see it all on YouTube Friday or Saturday. So once again, thank you so much for joining us, and stay informed.